for a minute about how you plan and prepare for a large project or paper or assignment in class. The wise way to go about this is to sit down and to think about, what do you need to do? What are those steps that need to be accomplished to get from the reception of the assignment on the syllabus maybe to when you turn it in? What do you need to research in the library? Which lectures do you need to take special notes during? What do you need to read? How much time do you need to set aside to work on this? Maybe you need to set up a meeting with your professor to get some advice, direction, help, whatever the case is. We're very familiar with the idea that there are certain projects in life that require very clear, deliberate planning. Today, in the gospel, we hear Jesus challenging us to renew our commitment, to redouble our efforts, to raise the bar in our attempt to avoid sin. St. Paul writes to the Corinthians, he says, we don't preach a wisdom of this world. Rather, it's a wisdom that doesn't make a lot of sense to our world. And what I would propose to you is that when we talk about the struggle with sin, this is something that we really don't hear in the world. In fact, we're getting to the point in our world today where at times the message often encourages us to do things that we might otherwise understand to be sinful. Now, before I get into the main point I'd like to make this morning, I have two things I want to say. One, whenever I preach about sin, I always do it as a hypocrite. Always. Because I'm a sinner. And I'm not just saying that. That's not just some nice, fluffy thing to say, oh, Father, so humble. No. Yeah, it's a real thing. And secondarily, I always get very uncomfortable when the topic of sin comes up because I'm convinced that the way in which we've been raised, the way in which most people speak about sin, is in a very toxic way. Very often the messages that we hear about sin are absolutely full of the toxicity of shame. We're not going to go there. I believe Jesus ended the gospel today with that passage, anything more is from the evil one. I believe shame is from the evil one. Now, there's a difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is the sense that I did something bad. Shame is the sense that I am bad. And so whenever we hear messages about sin that tend to attack our identity, that tend to try to convince us or motivate us through feeling shame, through the sense I'm not worthy of love, or I'm not holy enough, or whatever, all of those messages are toxic and from the evil one. We're not going to go there. We're going to set that aside. But we do have to have a conversation around sin. So here's what I would ask. What do you need? If you sit down on a regular basis and plan out your semester, plan out your year, plan out your life, very deliberately, what would that look like if we were to sit down and put together a technique or an effort to address our struggle with sin? We've all got that struggle. No one sitting here is immune. So what do you need? How can I help? Jesus raises three central issues today when he confronts our struggle with sin. And I believe that there are more, but it's worth thinking about these three because these are the ones that he wants to highlight. The first is our relationship with our brothers and sisters. Things like grudges, things like getting angry, things like looking down on others or calling people insults and saying terrible things about them. This is something that in our culture is getting worse. I've never seen it as bad in our world as it is today. I even see bumper stickers now that use the most foul language to insult a politician that someone may not like. I can't believe we've gotten to this point in our culture where this is now accepted as normal and acceptable. And the temptation is for that to then creep into our own lives and to conduct ourselves and to have that type of response to others. This cannot be. The second area that Jesus addresses is usually one of those topics that Christians spend way too much time thinking about in exclusion of others, but it is important, and that is the struggle with sexual sin. This is really where the problem of shame shows up. Because so many of the messages in our culture are shaming, whether they're the wisdom of the world or whether it's the way Christians talk about sexual sin. Shame is to be found everywhere. The third topic that Jesus addresses is the problem of anger with someone. Being angry with someone or being in conflict with them. We have to take a moment and put together a plan. So here's the main point I want to offer this morning. How can I help? When we wrestle with sin, usually we tend to retreat into deep isolation. We try to avoid admitting that we have a problem with sin. We try very hard to avoid acknowledging to others that this is part of our life. We retreat into isolation, and when you retreat into isolation, it's nearly impossible to authentically wrestle with sin in a holy way. Sometimes it even makes mental health struggles worse when we retreat into isolation and try to wrestle with sin. So I'll say it again. How can I help? Because I'm convinced if we are going to try again to put together a plan to wrestle with our own sin, the way to do it is through the assistance, the help, and the support of another. Now, maybe it's not me. That's completely okay. But if I can help, let me tell you what I can offer. One, I think this is incredibly important, the sacrament of reconciliation. I can't overstate the power of hearing those words, "You are forgiven." The experience of knowing the presence of the Holy Spirit as we are absolved and wiped clean of our struggles and shortcomings. And I acknowledge, in fact, I say this every time I hear a confession. Almost always the very first words out of my mouth are the words, "Thank you." Thank you for your courage in coming to confession. Thank you for your humility in understanding that you have sinned. I am so in awe of the courage and the humility required for people to come to confession and to take advantage of the grace. And here's why. Because I go to confession too. I know how hard it is. So my response to people in the sacrament of reconciliation is always to try to outdo my latest effort in compassion, gentleness, mercy, understanding, and love. That's what you'll receive from me. I know, I've heard all the stories that, and I've had them myself, that when we go to priests sometimes, we might have had a very negative, hurtful, painful experience, especially in the sacrament of reconciliation, where we weren't listened to or we were spoken to disrespectfully. I know, I've heard so many stories, I've even experienced it myself. I promise you, I won't do that. The second thing I can promise is that I am a very, very good listener. Sometimes the experience of just opening up our heart and baring our soul to someone is so cathartic and so healing. Because here's the thing, when our sin draws us into deeper isolation and shame, the best antidote is to take that step of unspeakable courage out of that darkness into an openness with another person. And I can offer absolute anonymity. I can provide to you total secrecy, right? It's what I do. And so you're safe. If I can serve you in any way, whether it's through the sacrament of reconciliation or you need to talk to somebody to just figure something out, tell the story of how you've experienced brokenness or how life has been messy, wherever you are, whatever is going on in your life, I am here for you. And you will never experience shame from me. You are safe. So I think it's worth considering maybe praying this week, right? You know, my cell phone number is on the front of every bulletin. Pray this week, consider how do I want to put together that plan to try to grow in holiness, to try to address my struggle with sin. What do I need? What are the resources that I can try to put together and reach out if I can help in any way? This is a really good thing, and part of this fits because in only a week and a half we're starting Lent, and that's really one of the big things we do in Lent, is we try to grow in holiness, we try to address our struggle with sin. I want to encourage you, please, I know it takes courage, I know it's hard, I know it takes humility, I know it's never easy to do, but I want to invite you because we heard Jesus' challenge. We heard Jesus' strong words, and I believe he's saying them not to shame us, but out of love for us, because he wants to call us into a new way of living that liberates us from anything that gets in the way of our full flourishing. And the ancient wisdom has always been that the more we grow attached to sin, the more we become enslaved to it. And so we've got to try, even if it's just a little way, to step away, to step back, to step out of our isolation, to take hold of the grace that's offered to us because it's there free, without condition, and offered with great love. Think about it this week. Pray about it this week. If you need to sit down with your planner, the way you might plan out a project or a paper, do that. Consider, what do I need to do and how do I need to take those steps to grow in holiness? And if there's any way that I can support you, you already have my number and my email. I will move heaven and earth for you. Just ask.